Welcome to Virtual Talk, Bark Rhythms, Bass Fibers, and Mexican Amate. This talk is the second of a series of 3 virtual talks in relation to Bark Rhythms, a current exhibition at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. And the show features historical examples of hand-beaten bark papers, bark cloths, and traditional beaters, paired with work of contemporary artists from global communities who use bark fiber materials and techniques in innovative and unexpected ways. This show is on view through August 23rd. And just for those of you who may not have heard of the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking, we're located on the campus of the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. And our mission is to collect, preserve, increase, and disseminate knowledge about papermaking, past, present, and future. We have a number of permanent exhibitions, as well as changing galleries. So anytime that you come to visit, there's something to be viewed. We also offer educational programs that include hands-on workshops, virtual workshops, virtual demonstrations, virtual talks like we're doing tonight, as well as YouTube tutorials. Goodness. But now that you know a little bit about the Paper Museum, I would like to turn over our video to the curator, or one of the 2 curators of this amazing exhibition. So Bark Rhythms, Contemporary Innovations and Ancestral Traditions was curated by Lisa Miles and Jill Powers. And Lisa is on with us tonight. I would love for you to just talk a little bit about what inspired this, or why you feel like this show is important to curate. And I also should mention that the show is actually one of the guest curated exhibitions that the North American Hand Papermakers sponsors. And then after you talk, I'll give the introductions for James and Cekouat. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight for the special programming for the Bark Rhythms exhibition. Co-curator Jill Powers and I are really excited about what this exhibition has brought together. We had the vision of bringing bark cloth and bark paper into one show to showcase the full spectrum and interconnectedness of these versatile substrates, which can be found in a number of traditions, including Indonesia, Hawaii, the Polynesian Islands, Mexico, and Uganda. The transmission of the tools and techniques and fibers links these communities across the globe. And exploring these traditions unveils a rich tapestry of cultural heritage, artistic innovation, and sustainable craftsmanship. Together, they offer invaluable insights into our shared human history. One outcome of the show that we've been really pleased about has been the opportunity to connect makers and researchers in real-time events like the one this evening. Tonight, we're lucky to hear from 2 passionate individuals, James Ojascastro, an ethnobotanist, aka Dr. Paper, and Cekouat Elim León Peralta, an artist and botanist from Mexico. We'll hear from James about the amazing regenerative bast fiber trees that are used to produce bark cloth and bark paper. And from Cekouat, we'll learn about papel Amate and the cross-cultural nature of his origami art. I did just want to quickly reiterate, this show will be on view at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking in Atlanta, Georgia through August 23rd. And then in October, it will open in Denver, Colorado at the Nizza Gallery and be on view in the month of October during the North American Hand Papermakers Annual Conference. So keep an eye out for the registration for that. And then thanks again to North American Hand Papermakers and the RCW Museum of Papermaking for their generous support of the Bark Rhythms exhibition. And a really big thank you to all of the artists involved. We couldn't have done this without you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read, you guys have short bios. So I would like to share those, and then I'm going to turn the screen over to James. So James Ojascastro is an ethnobotanist, papermaker, and origamist who uses ethnographic and ecological methods to explore plant science and fiber arts. He completed his PhD in 2023 at Washington University in St. Louis on the ethnobotany of papermaking traditions, with special focus on those from Nepal, Vietnam, and Mexico. Cekouat León is an origami artist and biologist based in Mexico City. Born in a family of artisans, musicians, and pre-Hispanic dancers, his origami designs reflect the way he perceives the animals and plants that are around him. And for the purpose, he uses a variety of handmade papers from all over the world, including Amate. Since 2022, he conducts research on the cultural and botanical changes of Mexican bark paper. You're up, James.
So thanks, Jerusha, for the wonderful introductions. Thanks also to Anna, Lisa, Jill, Virginia, and Mary, and the Robert C. Williams Papermaking Museum and North American Hand Papermakers for putting this all together. So I got my start as an origami artist. I've been doing it since kindergarten, and my journey started both as an artist and a scientist through paper. And I went to school in Maine and was very marveled. I marveled a lot at the flora that are available there and that grow in places like bogs. And so in the science library, you can find beautiful watercolors and lithographs of many of the plants. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to actually be able to fold representatives of this? And so as I proceeded to fold different kinds of origami from different kinds of plants, I paid a lot of attention to the specific kinds of papers that are tailored for specific kinds of folds. And you can see examples of that here. Some of them are machine made and some of them are made by hand from bast fibers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So for me, I became really interested in the second half of this process from paper to origami plant. But then as you tailor different kinds of papers to different kinds of folds, it really becomes necessary to focus also on what plants are used to make what kinds of paper. And because people are involved at each stage of this process, it falls really nicely as an example of ethnobotany, which is the scientific study of the relationships between people and plants. So plants are very modular, from the largest sequoias down to the tiniest herbs. They all fit together something like Lego pieces. And the operative unit for these is like a Lego brick, fibers. So these fibers are made out of chains of cross-linked cellulose molecules, and they're shaped something like straws, these fibers. These fibers are present in different parts of the anatomy of different plants. And so leaf fibers, such as abaca, originate from leaf tissue. And so what you see here, even the trunks of these abaca individuals are not woody, and they are in fact clusters of the petioles of these leaves. Contrast that to bast fibers, which is fiber originating from the phloem tissue of woody plants. So the xylem, as you can see in the leftmost photo, this composes the wood. And this is reinforced with lignin, which gives it a lot of structure and also makes it very difficult to pulp, at least by hand. this layer in blue in between the cortex and the xylem, this is your phloem tissue. This is tissue that takes sugars that are made via photosynthesis down to the rest of the plant, so the plant has energy. In many cases, these are highly cellulosic, very flexible, and very fibrous. And so people, instead of using the wood or the xylem, have used the phloem instead, or the bast, or the inner bark, as a raw material for making paper by hand. And this has a really long tradition. So examples from, let's see, the Iceman, who was discovered in the Alps, the Austrian Alps, had woven lots of cordage from bark fibers of European linden. This dates back even to the Neanderthals. And so there's evidence from caves and burials of the Neanderthals that show conifer bast have been twisted in certain ways and used for making nets and things like that. And so it is very intuitive to see that cordage diversified into textiles. And so people have beaten and macerated these different phloem tissues, bark tissues, using stone beaters, and use them directly as examples of felted cloth. And this occurs not just in Polynesia, mainland Southeast Asia, but also in the Amazon, Mexico, and sub-Saharan Africa. Here are some examples of plants from different parts of the world that are used for bark cloth. In Borneo, they use a relative breadfruit called terap. In Tahiti, they'll use breadfruit, but also a few other kinds of plants, including paper mulberry and the Pacific banyan. And in Mesoamerica, you'll see Cekouat, which is Pulsenia, a member of the fig family. And as we learned 2 weeks ago, that Ficus natalensis, or mutuba, is used in Uganda for bark cloth. In many cases, these are very intricately patterned or painted. And this segues, interestingly, into, well, what exactly is the difference between bark cloth as a textile versus bark cloth as a writing material? And there's one example from, it's called the Rangitoki Tapa, in which a woman from Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, had written some of the Rongo Rongo script, which is still not deciphered, and sent it with her lover, who was a European and left for Europe. And so this concept was pioneered by this guy, Victor Wolfgang von Hagen, who posited that paper is simply a conceptual and material consequent of bark cloth. So I want to introduce a few definitions here. So what I call hydrous paper, this is what we typically know just as handmade paper, is the use of water in a vat to disperse and tangle cellulosic fibers randomly through water dispersion. And this is in contrast to what we would call bark paper, or proto-papers, pre-paper, near paper, quasi-paper. I prefer to call these anhydrous papers, in which the tangling of the fibers is accomplished solely through beating and without the use of water in a vat. And these come in 3 flavors. We have papyrus, Amate and Un from Mesoamerica, and Dalawang from Indonesia. And so here, as we can see, there's no vat involved, and the tangling is occurring strictly through beating using a mundo or beating stone. And as we can see, the tangling is not fully random, and that we have alignment of fibers that is still present, such that the fibers are still in parallel in some regions. And so this has consequences in terms of folding, which Cekouat will talk about later. So altogether, many different plants are used for bark cloth, anhydrous papers, but how many really are there? And as we can see from many proofs of concept, many different plants and plant tissues may be used to make papers. And some of these are really well defined and have a lot of evidence to substantiate them. For example, herbarium specimens indicate that the Daphne plant from the Himalayas is used for making paper. And this particular inscription is in fact written on lokta paper that is made from the Himalayas. In the same case, another species, Stellara chemijasmi, also called Richakpa, has been used to dry plants in Bhutan for want of blotter paper to dry herbarium specimens. The issue is sometimes we have discrepancies in the identification. Historians and ethnographers who may or may not have visited the places where the bark is harvested may make assumptions that plants used in one location may be the same as the plants used in a different location. So botanists who may go to some of these locations may identify a species differently than what a historian or ethnographer may claim. And so we end up having many different lists over time that are present in a particular locality, but they may differ in claims about what species exactly are used. And so now we have to make an assessment. How much of this variation that we see over time is due to poor identifications versus actual changes in the usage of the raw material? Well, Cekouat and I, since 2022, have actually gone to San Pablito, where Amate is still made in Mexico, and been able to make determinations based on what plants are peeled and what Amate is made to validate some of these plant lists. We may also find new species that are used. So this is tule, which is a kind of cattail, tropical cattail, and we've discovered that they are using the peduncles, which support these little seed heads, and they will beat these and process these to make amate and also other kinds of amate products, crucifixes and things like that. The problem here is that there is no bark on the cattail. It is fully herbaceous, does not grow any wood. And so concerns about calling this a bark paper, well, there is no bark on this plant. There's no wood. And so maybe we need to introduce other ways of classifying or defining the materials that are made from it. There's also other examples of identifying what species are used. Dr. Isabella Abbott was the first Indigenous Hawaiian woman to get a PhD in science. And she was active at University of Hawaii, Manoa. And she did a proof of concept to determine whether claims that Hawaiian raspberries were used in the manufacture of kapa or bark cloth in Hawaii. And she and her students beat them and determined that the fibers do not felt fabric. What she believed is that when informants were asked, well, what is this? People may have pointed to the red dye or pigment that was present on the tapa rather than the fibers themselves and interpreted that accordingly. So out of nearly 400,000 species in the plant kingdom, from my authentication, I believe there are at least 10 species used for bark cloth, 18 for anhydrous paper, 50 for hydrous paper, yielding a total of 76 species, with a discrepancy of 2 because paper mulberry is a sole species example used for both bark cloth and hydrous paper as daluang and hydrous paper. So is this random or not? Well, we can borrow this from quantitative ethnobotany. And so what Dan Moorman has done is assessed, well, if traditional medicines were only placebo, plants would be selected at random with respect to the botanical family. And so just as an example, if 100 plant species across 4 botanical families are locally available, and 10 of these are used medicinally, let's just call them A, B, C, and D, we see that there is a proportionate subsample expected species used from those that are present in an area. If we were to actually give names to these families, and some of them are quite large, the asters have 32,000 species, and we used a proportionate subset. I want to remind you that only 76 species from my documentation are used for bark cloth and paper. Very few of them might be expected to be used. When in fact, the observed documentation differs quite a bit from what we might expect at random. And so this is statistically significant. So if plant choice for bark cloth and paper is not random, what dictates it? And so there might be some filters. I don't have time to talk about the other 5, but long, strong cellulosic fibers seem to be really important. And so in plant taxonomy, the ways that we group plants based on their characteristics and their evolutionary origin, they end in our nomenclature in ACE-AE. So one good example is a Thymoleaceae. This includes Locta, Mitsumata, leatherwood. One of the famous botanists from the Missouri Botanical Garden says that there is one unmistakable vegetative character, and it is that the thick homogeneous bark is extremely strong. Any part of it strips as a unit from twig or trunk base to apex. The thing is, this is not unique to the Thymoleaceae. We might see also among figs and mulberries that the same trait also applies. And here it is shown in the paper mulberry as well as ojite. And just as a third example, this is also apparent in the Cannabaceae. This is the family you think it is. Includes hemp, but also a few other woody species, including Lincellus, which is used for calligraphy paper in China, and Jonote colorado, which is the dominant species now used for Amate in Mexico. This strong bark is associated with long bark fibers in the phloem. So what if we were actually going to quantify this based on the 4 different dimensions that are present in these fibers: the width, the length, the thickness of the cell wall, and the diameter of the hole in the center. And here we can introduce a hypothesis here that the usefulness of a plant is a function of many characteristics evaluated simultaneously. So let's assess or evaluate these 4 characteristics and see if we can identify any patterns. So if we were to compare plants that have use in bark cloth, amate, and hydrous paper, shown in blue on the left, against species that have no tradition of use for any of these products, for example, burning bush, shown on the right, we can look at the fibers under the microscope, and here I've outlined them in bright neon colors for you. You can see that things like Mitsumata and its relatives have very long, wiggly cellulosic fibers as compared to other species that have short, stubby, sharp fibers. So I'm going to show you really quickly something called an NMDS. This is just a way of condensing 4 dimensions into 2. And that clustering indicates similarity. So I'm going to show a bunch of different points on 2 different axes. And so each of these indicates a species. I've shown this in black to reveal the ways that the species cluster depending on whether or not they're used by tradition for bark cloth and paper, shown in blue as TFF, versus those that are not, in red as NTFF. And it seems like the clustering of these groups is slightly different, and in fact, it is statistically significant. If you were to look only at anhydrous paper, bark cloth, and hydrous paper, it's a little bit more difficult to tell, but this also is statistically significant, both in terms of physiology and the botanical family associated with each of these groups. I also want to indicate all is represented in red by paper mulberry, which is used for all 3 categories. So what can we conclude? Fiber artisans have tailored different fibers for different products, and they are processed by different methods. And so this seems to disprove exactly what Victor von Hagen had posited, simply because we have very little overlap of species shared among all 3 felted fiber product groups. So artisans are very choosy. We have specific tailoring of species to their use. And why is this important? Well, if you really love, say, Paganini's concertos, right? Like, you need to have someone who is very skilled at playing, right? So Jascha Heifetz is shown here playing a Stradivarius. But in order to have a Stradivarius, you also need to have your Bosnian maple and your Norway spruce, right? So you have to pay attention to every aspect of this process, right? And so connectivity of these different groups is really necessary, from the plant to the harvester to the paper maker to even the people who sell these papers. And so we really have to have connections maintained between all these different moving parts. One way that we can ensure that is to simply continue documenting. So here's some fibers that I have collected and stored at the Missouri Botanical Garden Biocultural Collection, as well as examples of Mate, Vietnamese papers, and Mexican papers that are shown here in these map drawers. And we can also continue teaching and innovating. So shown here on the left is a pop-up Amate Nepalese papermaking workshop that I conducted with Cekouat in Atlanta. And Cekouat is also shown on the right, showing Amateros how to fold origami, perhaps for the first time, using the amate that they make. So I guess I'll wrap it up here, and I can take questions whenever suitable. Thank you.
Thank you, James. We're going to hear from Cekouat before we open the floor to questions. So if you have questions about James's presentation, please put those in the Q&A.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, James, for such a wonderful talk and introduction to everything. And I want to thank Jerusha and Lisa and all the team at the museum for allowing me to participate not only in the Bark Rhythms exhibition, but also in this series of talk. I really feel very honored and privileged. I'm going to talk about Amate and how in this century, everything around it has to deal with embracing history and syncretism. So to start, as Lisa said, I come from a family of pre-Hispanic dancers and pre-Hispanic artists here in Mexico. And this is the way that I got first involved with Amate. And most of what I do today, whether in biology or in arts, has some is a consequence from this context. So I want to dedicate this talk to the memory of my father, who left all this legacy for me. And given this tradition where I was involved, I mostly used Amate to make paintings. These are just a few examples of artifacts that are at my mother's house. This is a replicate of a scene of a codex, the Codex Laud, that shows the god Ehecat, the god of the wind, and the god of the death, Mictlantecutli, showing the contrast between life and death. This is a small book we made, and this is a chimali, or an Aztec shield made of feathers. In this case, we used amate and a few stones in this part of the chimali. However, as you usually rain in the sun and the rain, as you usually dance in the sun and the rain, it's not very good to have paper, you know, in the things that you're wearing. So I really got in contact with paper research when James invited me to participate in this exhibition at the Missouri Botanical Garden. The exhibition was called Living Through History, and it showcases the interaction between humans and plants through paper. So as you have just heard, James is very convincing when it comes to paper. So very promptly, we started to collaborate. So in this time, we have learned quite a few things about Amate. So to start, as you may know, Amate was the choice of preference when making codices. Codices tell the history and the cosmovision of Mesoamerican cultures, including migration. For example, Codex Boturini highlights the migration from the land of Aztlan to the central part of Mexico. Codex Dresdensis shows the cosmology of the Mayan tribes. But also Amate served as a decoration. In this case, this small decoration represents a figure of Amate that was painted using hule to the god Tlaloc, the god of the rain. And from Amate, they used to make also these kind of flags named Amatetewitl. Since the chronicles of the 16th century, we know that several trees that had the prefix Amat in the name were used to make Amate. And from the chronicles by Hernandez, we know that this kind of paper was distinguished by the fact that the fibers were spread by beating. And they used at least two kinds of stone, the one that was furrowed and another that was smoother to flatten the paper. According to the tribute charts, we know that many villages in all around Mexico were commanded to pay as tribute thousands or hundreds of sheets of amate to the Aztec Empire in Tenochtitlan. So in this sheet of the Codex Mendoza, we find this small drawing that literally represents 8,000 sheets of paper of earth, 8,000 sheets of amate. So I just want you to imagine that quantity of sheets of paper. That's enormous, but most of them were made in the villages in Tepoztlan in central Mexico. However, with the passing of the centuries, by the one century ago, the only remaining amate making villages prevailed only in this part of Mexico, next to the Gulf of Mexico. Back then, the amate that was made was actually kind of small. As you can see, it was about the size of a shoe. That's why these sheets were called sandals or huarachitos. And these were made mostly by women. Men usually took place in the harvesting process, but not in the making of the sheets. On the other hand, the paper was only used by shamans who were mostly devoted to the making of these coded figures that represent spirits. These spirits are called saki. Today, amate making only survives in the village of San Pablito, Puebla, which is located here in a very small point in the Sierra Norte de Puebla. Here, the amate is made only by the Otomi or Ñuhu, who live in the middle of the mountains. And here you can see that they wear very colorful dresses. And according to the articles from 1 century ago, when one arrives to San Pablito, one thinks that this is the scenario that one is going to see. However, San Pablito has changed a lot in the last few decades, thanks to the migration of men, women, and whole families to the United States. So right now you can see in San Pablito this mural painting made by Isma Bocato, and it highlights how there is a contrast, because on the one side you see the contact with the earth, with the land, with the language, and with the arts, and on the other there is a need to earn money. And the solution to do that has been to travel from Mexico to specifically Durham in North Carolina. As you can see, there is here an origami dollar plane. And to me, this mural represents the survival in San Pablito between mountains and dollar cents in the search of the promise of a new life. And this is very important because very few people who travel to work to the United States actually come back. And from those who come back, very few continue making amate. Instead, they start these small shops that have this very United States influence. And on the other hand, there are a few small restaurants that we call fondas, where people actually buy and accept dollars because the economy has totally changed. But on the other hand, we still see women selling amate in Pauatlan and San Pablito. But as you can see, all this economy is not really impacting the life of the people that are mostly making amate today. And I wanted to pay a lot of attention to this because we usually don't see this side of the market production, and it is even more complex when you see all the process that is involved to make amate, which is not easy for all the families in San Pablito. First, you have to get the fibers, as James explained it thoroughly. The two species that are mostly used right now are Jonote colorado, and a second that is only used by two families is Mora or Morus ultifolia. The process of peeling and cleaning is very similar to the other traditions all over around the world. The fibers are stored in these huge bales for up to 2 years. And then the fibers are cooked for more than 10 hours with ashes and lime. And they get this kind of pink, which many families use to make dye. And then they wash the fibers with a lot of water, sorry. And something that is also very important is that they usually bleach all the fibers using insane amounts of chlorine. And this is important because this water is usually used then for washing or cleaning the house, but most of the time it ends up in the nearby river. So this is actually an environmental problem. And when the fibers are bleached, these are dyed using underlines. Then for sheet formation, they spread the fibers over a wooden board, and then the fibers are beaten with these stones that are called muito or mundo. These are beaten several times to get first this very rough texture, but in the end, what you want is a very smooth texture that is ensured using orange peels. This is a huge sheet of Amate de Mora. And as you can see, with this kind of fibers, you can leave wide spaces among the fibers, but in the end, you have this very, very, very smooth surface on the Amate sheets. Then the wooden boards are left outside to dry. And as you can see, they also have incorporated other kinds of arts, including embroidery or Shakira or webbing and many kinds of stuff. And something very important is that when they peel off the sheets of Amate from the wooden boards, it's not uncommon that some parts are stuck to the board. That's when they use the stem of an orchid as glue. So this is a stem. It has a cut, and where they detect an imperfection, they literally use the stem as a glue stick to add patches over the damaged area. As you can see here, the patches are actually hardly noticeable, and it just takes only a few smashes to get this very, very smooth surface over the patches. This technique is rather recent from the 70s, and it is associated with the mass production of Amate. The species used is Certopodium macrobulbon, which is called cueña in Ñuhu, or glue in English, or pegamento in Spanish. This is a complex subject, and James and I actually published a research paper on the use of orchids in the history of Amate making. This is a complex subject, so if you want, please check it out in this link. So once that people have the finished Amate sheets, these are usually used to make more decorations. And as I mentioned it earlier, the making of flat sheets is not enough. They have to involve cutting or gluing many different kinds of Amate, involving colors or many different patterns. There are also family workshops in which many members of the family take place, and in others, only small pieces of Amate are used to make cheaper gifts for tourists. But in the case of a single woman who still make Amate in the families, they have switched not only to the making of these Amate frames, but also to make clothes or even to the use of chaquira. Chaquira is a tradition from Western Mexico, and they produce these colorful patterns that are even included in caps. This is very, very, very recent, and it's interesting because the cost of one of these caps is the same as one of these frames. However, the time involved and the effort involved to make one of these is at least twice or three times longer than the making of this. So there are many people who actually are leaving Amate production to make these kind of syncretic arts and gifts to tourists. But at the end of the day, all this research has allowed us to find new ways to interpret Amate. So, for example, as James showed before, we have experimented with folding. And before these experiments, I only know about two people who had tried folding Amate. One is Dr. Robert Lang, who made these very curved pots. And the other is Professor Matthew Green, who made this Chacmol mask. So these two models are very contrasting. One consists of only curves and the other of geometric folds. So that inspired me to experiment with other techniques. So that's how I came up with this bison, which is actually right now in the Papermaking Museum. And I think that in this case, Amate elevates the subject because the texture and the material gives so much content and weight. On the other end, with this bleached sheet of Amate, I could make this moth, and I thought it requires a lot of patience and a lot of sizing with methyl cellulose, for example. I think the results are noteworthy. And then when I came across with Amate de Mora, I realized that, James and I realized that it was a very innovative material. So from this, I have been able to make more complex models. This basiliscus is made using a technique that is called box plating, which involves several squares. You make a grid first. So this is a complex, an example of complex origami. So this demonstrates that Amate de Mora can be actually useful to make complex origami. In this case, this is a double-sided sheet. One side is only green and the other is yellow. And out of this model is way simpler. The Amate de Mora worked very well. In this case, I used several strips of green Amate, and these two orchids come from single uncut squares. These are other examples, again, by Dr. Robert Lang. He really liked the paper. This one by James. As you can see, it's complex to fold this material. Sometimes it kind of breaks off in some parts, but at the end of the day, it's actually very manageable. These are other examples from Mexican folders using different dyes, and I think they have got very nice results. And we as group in the Mexican Origami group have made workshops in San Pablito, and it's been very rewarding finding new ways of connections. There is a quote by Robert Lang about that origami is about the connections between the fibers in the paper, between the creases, and between the people and among the people. So I just want to show very, very quickly that after the research that we have conducted on the use of the orchid as glue, I have been experimenting using this as sizing, and only by peeling the pseudobulbs and cutting cutting it in small pieces, I have managed to get this kind of glue, and it's been very useful to size paper actually. This Amate de Mora is prepared only using the orchid glue. The texture obtained is very smooth, and out of the mucilage was purple. It didn't affect the paper, and from this sizing agent, I have been able to make this hummingbird. And this is again an example of complex origami in which a new material that is Amate de Mora was used, but also this orchid glue had never been used before for paper. There are records about its use for feather work, but this is something that I still want to continue exploring. And again, this involves more connections. And on the other side, we have been documenting that there are more plants that are kind of being ignored by people because the amate produced from this species doesn't have the same quality. We're still testing, we're convincing first the people that making amate from the plants that they already know may be useful. And I'm happy to say that we are in the way to see a wider production of amate made from the native plants that have been widely ignored. So I want to thank you all for listening. I want to thanks for the invitation. But most of all, I want to thank all the amateros who have been supporting us and enriching our knowledge on paper and amate so far. So that's it for me. I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to open the floor to questions. There's one directed to James asking if the list of suitable plants has been published, the list that you shared in your presentation.
The short answer is hang tight. Cekouat and I are working on validating it and making a publication very, very soon. If you would like links to some of the very credible prior assertions about what species have been used, there are many. They haven't been compiled in one place. I'm happy to send them to you. Just send me an email.
Okay. And then there's a question about the orchid glue. Do you know if orchid glue was used for sizing in pre-Hispanic era?
What we know is that it was extracted directly from the stems, and that it was used to glue feathers, like the work that I showed in my second slide, I think. But there are no records about its use as how to say, as a liquid or directly to paper. What we know is that it was most probably used to make a preparation base to make paintings, whether on paper or on animal skin, or even on stone. So its use was not directly related to paper. We have some comments on that in the research article that I showed you. So if you want, I can show the QR code so you can consult it later again.
Let's see. It says, what was the mate used for except for the decorative or rituals of shaman? It seems like it would have been too expensive to have books or to have large amounts of text on it.
Yes. Well, in the past, what I know is that the amate used for the paper dolls was mostly from Shalama, which is a fig tree. However, figs are not common anymore in San Pablito, or at least they are not commonly used. Actually, in the 2 years that I've been constantly going to San Pablito, I have seen a sheet of amate of Shalama only once. And yeah, its production is expensive because they have to harvest it from remote areas. On the other hand, other kinds of of plants were used to make darker amate. Among them, Trema micrantha, but also these were dyed with natural dyes. I don't have specific names right now, but there were at least one century ago 2 plants involved in the making of the paper dolls.
I can speak really quickly to just paper in general. Economics is a huge part. I'm not an economist, but as Cekouat and I have worked on studying these networks, it's become increasingly apparent that considering livelihoods and how they can adapt in this very globalized world is very important. One commonality that I have found between, for example, Amate and paper and say in Vietnam is that the religious aspect is very important in that there is a sacredness to the identity of what plants are used. And so, for example, some ethnic groups in Vietnam will say that only this species can be used for their kind of paper because that paper is used for a particular ritual or for a particular kind of manuscript. And if you substitute that, the inherent quality, the inherent sacredness of that manuscript is violated. And that's why they'll use certain kinds of species and make them by hand into paper versus using machine-made wood pulp paper. This is not always the case, but this is certainly a frequent refrain that I have heard into why handmade papers may be retained in the face of increasingly accessible wood pulp machine-made paper.
For sure. I'm just curious if you've run into, like you show the diagram of different aspects of the chain, the makers, the harvesters, the use of these materials. Do you find that some groups may be reluctant to share the information because it is sacred to them? Like, you mentioned that a lot of folks are leaving the areas, and then maybe when they come back, they're not continuing producing the amate. But is there any resistance from folks that are already in the craft to share it outside of the culture?
I can speak to my prior research, for example, in Vietnam. I think I'll leave Mexico specifically for Cekouat here. So our research is fully voluntary. We will talk and correspond with different artisanal groups, and they will volunteer information. It helps that we are artists, and we, also share what we know as, for example, origami artists, and that helps to share information that they are willing to have shared with the public, for example. One consideration, at least with papermaking communities that are highly endangered, is that they'll find that many people, many youngsters in their community can find higher paying jobs working at a factory, for example, and they cannot make as much money carrying on their parents' craft. And so they have shown considerable excitement, for example, when, someone like me, for example, goes into their community, talks with them, and is really excited about papermaking. And, that is a rare thing when, their kids or other neighbors' kids don't share that same zeal or excitement. And so if there aren't people who are able to document and share this knowledge and show that this knowledge is important and valued, it will oftentimes run the risk of being lost permanently. And so, yes, there is kind of a push and pull. There is a kind of like line that you have to walk into, being culturally sensitive about what they want to share and what they don't want to. But in many cases, they have excitement that at least someone shows excitement and value in their work. And that's why we are active, for example, in North American hand papermakers to actually make that connection with a wider audience who may also share that same kind of attention.
Gotcha. So we're at 9. Would you all be willing to stay on for 2 more questions? Okay. So this says, let's see. Art on the Amate canvas seems fairly widespread or widely sold. How is it that the region of Amate production has shrunk so much over time? Is some of the sold art of this type made on other papers? I mean, I know you just mentioned that the children are not necessarily picking up the craft, but are we also seeing kind of replica versus the actual traditional stuff kind of edging in?
Yeah, I think there is an historical event that is very important here. That is that in the 60s, 70s, basically the Amate production exploded because there were more tourists interested in the paintings that Nahua people from Guerrero, a very far state from Puebla, were making with the Amate sheets. So the network was that Amate was being produced in Puebla and then sold to the painters in Guerrero, painted by them, and then shipped to Mexico City and elsewhere. So the thing is that now we have seen that many people are just in the middle, that are reselling the Amate sheets, or that are painting sheets that were made from amateros, probably not exactly living in San Pablito, but elsewhere. That is not common, but there are at least 1 or 2 families who are making sheets of Amate extensively for a big paper store here in Mexico that is called Lumen. And that's actually a problem, because Lumen pays, I don't know, like 50 cents of a dollar for each sheet. That definitely doesn't pay for all the work that is put behind. So this way of consumption has impacted both the market, but also the biological side. So to me, it is still very impressive that when you arrive to San Pablito, you don't see actually Amate being made in a massive scale. I think James will agree that actually you have to walk to find someone building the fibers or selling Amate. And furthermore, there are stores that were opened 2 years ago when we traveled to San Pablito for the first time, that are now closed because someone in the family already died, or because the family immigrated. So I think that most of the Amate that is widespread all over the world right now will start to decrease very soon. And on that note, I have to say that I think that it will take a huge effort and change in the mindset of the young generations to keep the tradition of Amate alive. And it is necessary for governments and from local institutions to support more Amate. So I'm happy to have a chance to talk about this to you, but also I am very open to comments on strategies to engage more in this social side of Amate, because it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to me to see how complex it is in the social, in the political, and in the biological side. I hope to have to have answered sort of the questions.
And that kind of leads in or ties into the final question. And this was addressed to both of you. They wanted to know how you two met, and then how your collaboration has impacted the communities making the bark paper and handmade paper, and any other ancestral techniques. And if you had any recommendations for someone who wanted to support helping to revive these crafts. So I mean, 3 questions in one there, but if you guys could tell us a little bit about how you guys connected, and then any impact that you've witnessed from the work that you've been doing with these communities.
Well, I shortly will say that I first contacted James because I was already a fan of his origami works. And at the moment he was making this survey about the paper preferences among in the origami community. And I think he has more experience in the second question, so I will leave the word to him.
Yeah, I did a survey a few years ago to see exactly what kind of qualities of paper that different artists prefer, right? Some people who make geometric things like paper to be have certain textures or be machine made, and people who do more organic works might prefer handmade papers of a certain texture, or a certain thinness or thickness, etc. And long story short, Cekouat was just like, you should come to Mexico and study paper and fold together. And so I did in July 2022, and it was in the thick of the COVID pandemic, and we had to navigate some pandemic restrictions, but like ultimately we went into the field together and learned way more than we could have learned from the many treatises that have been published previously, and realized that there's a lot of work to be done, in large part because times have changed quite rapidly in the many centuries that Amate has been studied. And it's been really amazing to see how the things that we learn together are things that not only we have taken and ran with to fold exquisite Amate origami works, but to see that this is contagious, that both the Amateros and origami artists in Mexico and beyond are recognizing that different media may be used in new ways with the support of artisans that have held on traditions for 500 or more years. In terms of ways that we can get more networking or more support, I think the first and foremost is to support the Amateros directly, support paper makers, support bark cloth makers, buy their products, purchase, whether it's something that they've done by tradition or something that they've innovated, used as like crucifixes or as tapestries. We need to support them. They need to have a way to continue their livelihood, to make money, so that their children can continue to carry on this craft. also, come to many of these places, like in many parts of the world, Vietnam and Mexico. There are people who do tours, and that can bring in some money to help communities continue their traditions. And it can also encourage both you as well as the artisans who live there to find new uses for amate. Like we talked specifically about origami, but maybe you want to explore using cyanotypes, or you want to use amate for different kinds of fiber sculpture or block printing or woodcuts, whatever. These different innovations help the traditions themselves adapt and also continue providing a economic demand for the materials that they make, the art that they make. Cekouat, anything else to add?
Yeah, I totally support everything you have just said, and I would like to add that it is impossible to work as individual on these things. You have to work collectively, and something that I've found very important as well is that it's very common in San Pablito that people see Amate as as how to say, people usually do not appreciate it as a piece of art. They look at it as a craft, as a minor kind of art. So the most successful families in San Pablito are actually those who have been able to be more creative or to innovate in any way. But there are so many people making valuable pieces of amate art that are not being recognized as artists. So I think that something that has at least changed the mindset of a few people we have talked to is when you go to their workshops and start seeing the amate with different eyes. I mean, when you take a piece and start folding something with it, or when you start writing on it, or you take it home and then send them pictures of what you made, whether it's a book, whether it's a drawing. But there, you have to start this conversation with the people, not feeling as a foreigner strictly. I think it needs cooperation, and most of all, they in this modern context, they also have cell phones. They also have TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. They are not in this isolated context. They have also developed their own tools to communicate and to establish connections with their clients and with more people. So I think that we have to understand that they have a context that is richer than the indigenous people in there in the mountains that usually is read on paper, right? So you have to establish a more horizontal relationship with all the people. And I think doing that, you will start to being more fed by all their knowledge, and they start to perceive you not only as a researcher or as an artist visiting the village, but more as a friend, more as a colleague, more as someone that can share something of value and that is worthy of listening to their traditions and of their history. So I think it's just a matter of honesty and spending real time with people.
That is a great point to end on, I think. Oh my goodness. Thank you guys for sharing with us. The talk was amazing. There's a million questions, but just not enough time to cover everything that we could be asking. I am just putting this slide up. This contact information was pasted in the chat. So if you save the chat, but there's a website as well as Instagram for both of our presenters. Thank you all so much. I would also like to encourage you, if you enjoyed this talk and would like to support future virtual presentations from the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking, we're always happy to accept a donation. And you can find that at mygeorgiatech.gatech.edu/giving/papermaking. If you are in Atlanta or coming through the airport and have any kind of layover time, our exhibition reception is Thursday, July 11th from 4 to 7 p.m. It's free and open to the public. And also, if you're in town, we have an in-person workshop of bark paper and lace bark. That's Tuesday, July 16th from 7 to 8:30. That is a $30 workshop. And then we will be closing out our series of virtual talks for this exhibition in August. On Wednesday, August 7th from 8 to 9. So I hope that you guys can come back and join us for that talk as well. All of the talks are being recorded and will be accessible on our website, paper.gatech.edu. You can also find the museum on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. And if you'd like to get our digital newsletter so that you get all of the programming notices sent to your inbox, please shoot an email to anna.dahl@rbi.gatech.edu. We appreciate you joining us and posing great thought-provoking questions. And there's so much covered. I really do encourage you to come back and look at the recording again. Give us a week or so to get everything edited and posted. But the first talk, if you missed the first talk, it is up and available on our website now. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate it, and you guys are getting all kinds of love in the chat. Have a great evening or day, depending on where you are in the world. And hopefully we'll see you guys again soon. Bye.